Hi, and a very warm welcome to our latest WOA webinar. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by some great speakers to talk to you about techno trends, what's going on, what's new, what's changing in the world. The world around us is very volatile. There's lots of things happening. Technology is part of that, part of leading it, part of following it. But whatever the case, I think there's a lot going on. So great topic to discuss. And we've got some really good speakers for you to enjoy this afternoon. So I'm delighted to be joined. Let me go around the Zoom table. Brian Shanahan, welcome. Great to have you here. Brian has a business Informator, and Brian really is a working capital guru. I think anything to do with working capital, he's your man. Been in business for many years now, and really specializing in what makes business tick. Also delighted to be joined by Elliot Averson, CEO of Dance Race. Hello, Elliot. Warm welcome to you too. Elliot, the leader of a very innovative and advanced software company, Dance Race, who providers of software support receivables for receivables finance industry businesses, and really finger on the pulse and a great raconteur of what's going on in the industry at this time. And also Daniel Hussar. Welcome to Daniel from FCOM. Daniel is, again, one of our great friends of WOA, expert in technology and well-versed in what's going on, all aspects of what's going on in this new technology world. And Daniel, of course, is also the facilitator of WOA's Learning Lab on FinTech and new technology. So a great bunch of people to talk, and I think what I'd like to do is have a really open conversation. Obviously, if there are questions from the audience, I'd be delighted for us to deal with those as they arise, or at the end of the program, depending on what is appropriate. So Daniel, let me pass the handle over to you, the baton over to you, and start the conversation. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you for the warm introduction, John, and and thank you also for Brian and Elliot joining us. It's a great pleasure, to be on this panel with you guys. And let me just give you a short intro of what we thought about when we kind of conceptualized this talk, because for me it's getting more and more difficult to really talk about technology, because especially if we talk a lot about different technologies, because it seems that we always don't have enough time. The panels are too big, which is not the case. It's not the case here. 3 people or 4 is perfect. And there's a lot of buzzwords, going on. And this is why we kind of decided that we will try to paint a picture of what is happening in the world, also besides the receivables finance business, and kind of see what we can learn from that, and what technologies are becoming more and more important. So a little bit more of an experiment in trying to find the narrative pulse here, besides just saying blockchain is the future or something like that. Or maybe let's try to find out why, if so. And and I would like to start with one thing that Brian, that we talked about also in the introductory talk for this panel, is about the situation in supply chain finance and government funding. Let's say, or more of government insurance situation, which I found fascinating, and maybe please enlighten us.
Well, I think that there's 2 aspects to this going on at the moment. One is around supply chain finance, where I think anyone who's directly involved in the industry will tell you that the last year they've been absolutely up to their neck busy. But that's busy talking to people who prospectively want to do supply chain finance, and that's fantastic. When you ask the second question about how many deals have you actually done, you can get a slightly different answer, because when we start looking at risk, if we look at funders, they obviously would love to, and they're absolutely throwing money at AAA folks, But when you're in the B category of risk, depending on where you are on that spectrum, if you're at the top end of it, it seems pretty easy, But if you're towards the bottom end of it, life can actually be quite difficult. So there can be a lot of ambition there for this kind of supply chain finance of whatever type it is, yeah. But it doesn't necessarily mean that the tap doesn't flow. And one of the interesting things, this is kind of a parallel thing when we talk about. In many countries, there's been all these kind of COVID loans, particularly for small business, but not entirely, yeah, and slightly different schemes in different countries. And then someone says, oh, but it's 80% backed by the government in terms of the bad loan goes bad. So surely shouldn't the banks be free and easy about lending all the money? And the answer is they're not, yeah, because once the loan defaults, and a lot of these loans will default, that's going to put a big hole in their balance sheet, go back into Basel regulations and all that kind of stuff, which means that they have to hold back more liquidity. And they know that there's quite a lengthy timescale between a loan going bad and them being recompensed by whatever scheme comes from government, insurers, whatever that may be. So in the meantime, they have to cover this liquidity gap. Yeah. So that's why I'm coming across a lot of funders, particularly those who are related to retail banks, who are actually being quite cautious at the moment in terms of who they lend money to, particularly if it's a new customer. Yeah. So there's things going on that we read the newspapers about, and that's true, yeah. But it's also something going on in the background that actually they prefer not to talk about, and so how this unravels is difficult to tell, because I think one other thing we mentioned, there was an Atradius survey that they published back in March about insolvencies, yeah, where insolvencies in the OECD countries actually decreased by 14% in 2020. Why? Because there's lots of zombie businesses out there which are basically being supported by various forms of government money, yeah, or rent freezes and things like this, yeah. But of course, when that ends, they're forecasting that in the same countries, insolvencies in 21, they're projecting them to go up by 26%. And if you look at the countries where that's going to be highest, it's going to be places like the UK, Australia, places like that, where actually the greatest amount of business support has been given in 2020. So when the carpet's pulled from them, we're going to see lots of stuff collapse. But is that certain to happen? Well, we don't know. And look at what's happening in this economic revival that we're kind of in the middle of, yeah, where lots of people were kind of doing the doom and gloom for months and months, and it was all going to be terrible. But the reality is that there's lots of people with lots of money. We see property markets all over the world, in just boom time, yeah, which is a bit crazy. We see lots of employers who just can't hire people, particularly at the low pay grades, yeah, because in the last year they've gone and they've retrained and they've done something else and so on. So that there's a whole bunch of different dynamics going on with different businesses at the moment, which means that if we're even to project 6 months ahead right now, never mind 6 years ahead, yeah, I mean, we just don't know, simply don't know. But the good news is it's not all bad. Elliot, you were alluding to this earlier, that if there's a winner, there's always a loser. Yeah, and this is absolutely true as well here. We hear all about people who are unemployed and can't pay their rent and so on, which is true. But there's so many other people who are actually doing really, really well at the moment. Yeah, strange paradox. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that from what I've seen, that actually the process that people went through to get those loans or the support have actually is a very similar process that you go to get working capital finance. And so some businesses who were not aware of those types of products with support from independents or banks or governments, if they have to be, will now be thinking about borrowing for working capital reasons rather than borrowing for expansion or borrowing for acquisitions. So I think it probably has expanded the some business owners, corporates or SMEs, to the idea of borrowing money, which again has good and bad outcomes. But actually, at the moment where everyone has to borrow, that's I'm not sure if that's ever going to lead to a good outcome long term. Borrowing because you can't work is an odd place to be, isn't it? It should be borrowing because you can work, but you're not working effectively enough or efficiently enough. But not working at all, yeah. I'm quite skeptical about the future. Well, hopefully everyone is, but I'm quite skeptical that it's going to be a net positive result. I think we've probably just shifted the impact along a bit in time.
I mean, my own opinion, Ali, is I'm not actually that skeptical. I know there's bad things coming down the pipeline, yeah, but it's not all bad. But I think what is going to happen is that we're seeing probably about 10 years of progress happen in 18 months. And some of that is very positive, in terms of, reduced carbon footprint for me personally, for instance. I'm sure many others as well.
Well done.
Much of that is going to be brutal on some people, because there are many businesses out there who just haven't changed. They're trying to pretend that it's all going to go back to 2019 again, and it isn't. And those are largely the people who are comfortable beforehand. And we see this very often in businesses, that when people are comfortable, there's not much of an agenda for change. And of course, then if they leave it too late, then they get swept up in the tsunami that just takes them all away down the river. So it makes it more important than ever, I think, that for people to innovate in business. And I know we both run businesses, where sometimes it is that kind of Saturday evening thing, and you see something odd on TV and you go, wow, maybe I could do that. And most of those ideas are mad, and you never do them, quite rightly, but it's from those kinds of interactions with the world that innovation happens. But on the other hand, if you closet yourself away and everything's going to be the same forever, well, it just isn't. It never was like that, and it never will be.
Well, you draw a parallel to the animal world. Animals don't evolve until a pressure or some form of environmental impact occurs, and then things change. They grow and they modify. So maybe the impact of this could be smarter businesses, people who are more risk aware. They're planning for the future with caveats, not just the best case scenario, and maybe it could be good. I certainly know lenders will be thinking, they're going to be putting in back to the question about insurance and things like that. Insurance is going to be a much more important part of a business model for lenders and people thinking of lending money generally. Frankly, businesses probably self-insuring is going to go up. Without the involvement of a lender or the government, I think they'll be looking at insuring your own working capital arrangement. That's quite an interesting prospect, and it's available, of course, but not to a lot of people. So.
But it's interesting when you talk about risk like that, because if you go back to the last financial crisis, the credit insurers basically retracted everything by a certain percentage to protect themselves and protect the market. And slowly they've been kind of unwinding a little bit, but not quite as relaxed as they would have been in 2008. Over the last decade. And now the problem that those same people have is that they're finding it very difficult to predict what's the credit risk landscape going to look like in the next 12 months. So and for them, it's for instance, a year ago they were very wary about the food industry. That's turned out to be wrong. Restaurants, yes, not food industry, because supermarkets have had a great time. But there's a whole bunch of things which they weren't sure about a year ago, and they're still not sure about it now in terms of the way things are going to turn out. And what's quite interesting in all that, if you think of it, some of the world's greatest companies that we know now were born in the middle of recessions. Microsoft, Apple, if we go back far enough, people like IBM, and so on, they were all born in very, very tough economic times, and they all did something at that time which really appealed to their market, and that's how they really got a foothold, like we see with Zoom now. I mean, Zoom, if we look at all these technologies, look at what we're using right now. None of it is actually new technology. It's been around for a while. It's just we weren't using it.
That's a great point, Brian. If I might interject, because Actually, this is right. Like a lot of the technologies were there before, even with blockchain. You know, to facilitate this. This has been there for a long time. But to combine like cryptography and some database technology and these kind of things. But maybe two points about what both of you said now. One thing I would stress is that we have a conceptual challenge really ahead of us. For example, in risk models, it's not really a technological one. So this is why I think this is such a great point, because it's all there, you know, like all the APIs and what have you. Maybe the AI, maybe the machine learning could still be improved on these things, but you know, that's also what we discussed. So this is one point that is important, and yeah, and the other one, okay, no, no, I lost my train of thought. That's perfect. Yeah, but if somebody wants to jump in, yeah, the tech. So the tech is there, but we don't know. Still don't know. Like credit insurance is just like a Band-Aid. To put it on there, because we don't understand what is really happening at the marketplace, and we kind of, great point that Elliot made. It's just like it's you know, you lend because your business is good, to kind of, you know, to give you liquidity, to you know, it's not it would be that cliche of a lender of last resort that we're kind of now fulfilling with the situation, which factoring was never about in a way.
True, and factoring actually is a very interesting subject in all this, because you know, it's literally as old as the hills. Yeah, I mean, people have been factoring for literally thousands of years in different ways. Yeah. So in that respect, it's really not new at all, and it's probably a good barometer over a long period of time of technology, because you know, it's only centuries past before legalisms, proper legalistic stuff, you know, got into factoring, which we now live with today. And now it's the technology front and so on, you know, and it goes on to another thing. And we see all this stuff like, you know, open accounting and APIs and, you know, all sorts of stuff flying around the place. Yeah. Many of which are still in their infancy. Yeah. So you can see you can see what the potential is in terms of how these things can improve. But I think, Daniel, you're absolutely right, that one of the things that basically has not changed that much at all is how we actually assess risk. I mean, in my early career, I used to work in shipping insurance, yeah, and the actuarial department were right next door, a bunch of extremely clever fellas. And this is before we have all our supercomputers and all this kind of stuff, yeah. And basically, the methodologies for assessing risk have not changed in the course of my career, and that's, you know, 30 years plus, yeah. Which you would think, given a lot of the technology and the data and so on that we have, that we actually could be much more sophisticated, much more targeted in terms of how we assess risk. So for instance, I was mentioning earlier about food companies, yeah? You know, there's a big difference between a food company that delivers to Nestle than delivers to Tesco or delivers to the local restaurant. They're completely different businesses, yeah? And of course, the difficulty for many of these guys is many of these food companies, they deliver to all of these different people in different proportions. So actually, it's quite difficult for them to understand, you know, the proper proportionality of how they assess risk at this aggregate level. Yeah, interesting, because, you know, actually, if we look at, is there data available which would allow them to do it? Actually, there is.
Exactly.
You made a point there earlier about how we've got to kind of almost look at last year and rule it out. You know, so people are saying, oh, is it going to go back to what 2019 was? But if you use these data models and you use what machine learning or AI would use, which is just big data, they're going to look at last year as a normal, you know, a normal anomaly. And you kind of can't do that, because as you say, things have happened that people wouldn't have predicted, or data models back in March last year would have said, oh yes, don't go anywhere near the food industry. Whereas actually, you know, people on the ground would have said, well, I've just read in the news, there's a pandemic coming. I might anticipate that people might not be able to go outside much, and therefore the food industry, you know, for Ocado or, you know, people, you know, food delivery services might go up. And therefore, if you were in March to not lend to Ocado, but in April there's a lockdown, you would have made a pretty poor choice based on data models. But I suppose that's where maybe AI has got to really step in, because hopefully AI will be looking at the news. It will be looking at things more than just, do people do well if you lend money to this person? And typically people do well if you lend money to this industry. And unfortunately, I think we have a very, the other thing is actually, it's actually blending that human experience into a data model, and that's where machine learning and AI will hopefully step in. I mean, as you say, we're way
there is
off.
that sense, isn't there, that where is this boundary between the AI, the technology, and human nature? I mean, one of the things that the psychology of this is that in this period of uncertainty, we've constantly had risk assessment, risk analysis, which really has followed the sky is falling approach, and has tended to err on the very negative side. And certainly the way it's reported, whatever the range of outcomes can be, the one that's reported is the very, very worst and a bit more. And I think one of the things that has also been apparent is the actual resilience of economies, the way that the economies have bounced back, which has been quite different to that which was originally projected. Again, people saying it take years and years to recover from this, and then when you look at the markets and the economic activities, actually they're going back up as quickly as they came down. So, in again, how one might model that, how one might use AI to predict is I think a fascinating challenge, because here there seems to be sort of counterintuitiveness between the data on the ground and people's psychology.
But I think there's another problem, I think, with AI, which is I think our ambition for the technology is way ahead of the capability right now. Yeah. So I've had it described to me that, imagine we're playing a game of chess. Yeah. We have defined number of squares, we have a defined number of pieces, it's defined exactly where they can move. So quite frankly, if you have a computer that's strong enough, it can calculate every possible move and combination imaginable. Yeah. Now compare that with, and this is a real life problem I have, yeah, where I have clients trying to do cash forecasting, yeah, and they're literally just trying to say, how much cash will arrive on my doorstep next week, yeah. So if we look at the historical data, I have one client, yeah, who have more than 8,000 customers. So there is no chessboard, there is no set of rules. We're dealing with 8,000 different versions of human irrationality as to why things happen, and you hit your credit limit and you had to pay early, or you just paid early because it was, Friday was 2 days before the end of the month, so we just said I'll pay it, or we're going on holidays and we paid it early. People do all sorts of irrational things. And this is what the forecasters are not good at the moment. Is they're brilliant. The technology, what it's done in the last 5 years particularly, is the idea of aggregating gigantic amounts of data now is just ridiculously easy. That bit has been totally nailed. But the bit that's not been nailed is introducing true machine learning into understanding these patterns. And I think the only problem is, I don't think it's a case of, are there scientists out there with the mathematics who who understand how to do this, because there are. The problem is that the technology is not in our laptops right now, because they're not powerful enough to actually do all this. And I think in 10 years time that'll be totally different.
Yeah, but this is, I love this point and I love this discussion, and I have to just because what you just mentioned, Brian, is perfect. What you just mentioned is basically Kasparov playing against Deep Blue, like an IBM computer. 76, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not sure about the year, but it's late 70s. And this is called, just for the audience, this is called the brute force approach, what you just described. I know every possibility that there is, and I'm just going to pick the best one, because I have a compare. I mean, it's still a lot of data, and it's still a lot of decision trees that are going to happen, but it's still possible. And and this is the same in our, we have great risk tools now, like much greater, of course, than you had to work with or your colleagues had to work with back in the day. But this is still based on human experience. So we try to put out a fishnet that we know, like, so some patterns, is this invoice, has it been written on the weekend? Has it been written, do we have patterns and amounts? And we have some nice Benford analysis to find it. It's basically a tool that finds patterns. It's not true machine learning in that sense. But what gives me hope and scares me a bit is one example from one game, which is very complex. It's a game of Go. And this is right. This has been 2016, I think. This is just this game is also a board game where you kind of take over the squares. It's like black and white dots, and you kind of take over the squares, the dots of the opponent, and the board is yours more or less. But this game is much more complex than chess, let's say, and there are more more things you can do in any given moment, that there are atoms in the universe. At least that's what I read. So let's say just a lot more than in chess. So I cannot, it's not possible to calculate, to brute force your way through this with the technology we have now. Maybe not ever. Maybe with quantum computing, who knows? And there's a company called DeepMind, which was acquired by Google shortly after, or even before that, I'm not sure. And they played 5 games against the at that time reigning world champion from Korea, Lee Sedol, who was, well, long story short, was beat he lost 4 out of 5 games. And the way, and then this still gives me goosebumps every time I tell this story, is there's a Netflix documentary, you can watch it, and he said on there, it doesn't matter, like, how was I able to win that one game? that's what matters. And it was one of the last ones, the 4th or the 5th game. I'm the 4th one, I think. And he said, this AI, this machine learning AI, it taught me new things about the game. It was beautiful. It was art, like something like this. And he quit the game after. I think it's so sad. It's really so sad, because he said, this guy, he's the best player in the world, and he has been playing this game probably 30 plus years, and he learned new things. And this is one thing that my hope is, that AI will teach us new things about risk. With all that data available now, with the still rising computing power and those new machine learning models, and one trick that they use, is to kind of model, and I will close with this, is one model where they don't have a big decision tree with every possible combination, but smaller decision trees of things that might happen, basically, to kind of get a grip on that huge set of data and those huge set of options that we have. So that could help us in situations like these, where it's kind of unpredictable, like, and still more possibilities than in the game of Go. In the real world.
I mean, my own opinion, Daniel, is it's only a matter of time before these technologies are in the hands of ordinary users out there. I personally think it's going to be a long time, because I'm actually quite confident that I will finish my entire career before anyone's using these tools properly.
Okay. How long is that going to
be? You're tired this afternoon.
Hopefully another 10 or 15 years, longer if I'm allowed. But secondly, one of the things that you see very commonly with all these different technologies is, the mathematicians and the scientists and so on, they have worked out in theory how these things can work. If we talk about quantum computing or AI or any of these things, they know that now, in terms of the theory of how these things should work. What they tend to be very poor at, is finding real business application for many of these things. So, for instance, what you're talking about, Daniel, about assessing credit risk would be a fantastic thing for it's something that can be highly complex. It's very, very data rich, and so on. It's a perfect candidate for it. But the problem then is how do you introduce rules that are not just the rules of mathematicians, which tend to be quite abstract and very difficult to translate into the real world for business people, versus the more kind of intuitive ways that business people like to behave between themselves. Yeah, that's a massive gap. And I mean, the classic example, if we look in recent years, is in the UK they were laying fiber optic cable all over the country back in the 1980s. Yeah, but it took them another 20 years to figure out what to do with it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that is the problem, though, isn't it?
Like that, yeah.
I mean, I one of my thoughts is, and something we're always challenging is, whilst it's great for me, I'm a complete nerd to think of all these great ideas. What benefit does it have to the customer? Is it going to get them money quicker or cheaper? Is the lender going to make faster decisions? Because if actually in the end this AI, well, first of all, it sounds extremely expensive right now, doesn't it, as well? So you say to a bank, we can implement you an AI that's going to, tell you how to run your business. First of all, they'd probably run to the hills because, frankly, it sounds too risky if that doesn't work out. But what is the end result? And I think at the moment we are, as you said, we're gathering lots of data and aggregating data, presenting it in a sensible way. So a human being, who the best AI we currently have, human beings, will come in and look at that data and say, okay, this says that. I think, therefore, I'm going to do this. I'm going to lend, or I'm not going to lend, or I'm going to stop lending if I'm already lending. And those decisions are currently needing a human being, and probably will for some time because of the fact that we're not comfortable. Unfortunately, cases like automated driving, it's not had a great press recently. If you wouldn't let a car take you down the motorway without you having to hold the steering wheel just in case, why would you let a machine tell you to lend somebody £10 million? I think those two things are quite closely connected. So, but I am an advocate for it, but again, it's got to be a solution with a problem rather than a solution looking for a problem.
And I think you're spot on, actually. I'm reminded of blockchain automatically.
Yes, me too.
Of a solution that's looking for a problem. Yeah, and it's been described as so by a lot of different people. Yeah, but it's a great example, and we saw this back at the .com boom. You guys are probably a little bit young for that. Yeah, where every man's dog had a website of feed my pet kind of in 2 a.m.com. Yeah. And these businesses have whatever innovative ideas they were, they very largely failed, yeah, because they were just dumb business ideas in many cases. It wasn't the technology, yeah, and it created a whole boom. And I think now we're in a slightly different period with technology where there's lots of things coming along, and lots of people talk about them as buzzwords, blockchain, AI, all this kind of stuff, yeah. But I think the business community they have a much healthier skepticism about it, in the sense that yes, they are listening to say yes, these things are coming along, but what they're waiting for is the blockbuster application that comes along that uses this, and then they jump onto that again, not before, and I think it's a slower way of progressing, but it's more assured of some kind of organic development over time. But at the same time, you see in different parts of the world where some people are more conservative than others. That's just the nature of humanity, isn't it? Whereas it's always like the 10% of people who buy the latest iPhone with every bug imaginable, and they're so happy with it, yeah. Whereas actually, what the majority of people do is they wait 6 or 12 months to see how you got on with all the bugs, and when they're fixed, then they go and buy it, yeah. And I think most people that bucket, yeah.
So, but I have to say two things. I'm much more optimistic about AI than I am about blockchain at the moment of doing things, because I see for myself, and this still is utopia because it would mean the AlphaGo model for risk, for taking on the credit risk challenge, let's say, with machine learning. But for me, at least, there is a clear application, and that is to make better decisions and to lend more. Right, so we have this, instead of just saying, let's be more efficient or something more abstract like this, because and the way this could work, and just I'm now just thinking out loud, is that we have something that is called unsupervised learning. The thing that we now do is more supervised learning, where we say we have like this fishnet of parameters in a way, and we find the patterns and we find the bad guys or the potential bad guys, and then the risk manager will, I don't know, will call the debtors to verify and these kind of things, like, aha, gotcha, you know, or not. And the other approach is to have like a huge pool of data, which we have now with the advent of PSD2. Data that we didn't have before, and now much more easily accessible and legal, you know, if they give consent, they give the data. And we have lots of possibilities to use web crawlers to look at different things. And what we could do is that we kind of combine the approach of supervised and unsupervised learning, that we see, you know, what about this data set? Could we kind of use this? And then the AI figures out the patterns on its own, and we kind of reverse engineer this to learn about this data set, things that we couldn't come up with because humans are not built that way, right? We are looking more at I don't know, hundreds of years of risk experience of humans. So that would be really my hope, that we find better and more flexible models in a way, but they need to be reverse engineered. That's the big problem. Or the BaFin will just say in Germany, you know, what is this black box that you are using there? That's not okay, basically. So and with blockchain, I just see these huge projects in supply chain finance, which would add transparency and efficiency through, you know, showing the whole, let's say, a whole shipping way, and then having smart contracts and doing the you know, credit insurance. It's insured because the bananas have the right temperature with sensors and stuff like this. But this for me seems kind of logical and more efficient, but it just seems so an impossible political challenge, not a technological one.
Practical nightmare to actually make it
horrible.
You know, you can. I mean, blockchain, the concepts of that were made donkeys years ago. You know, actually having an audit trail for goods, it's not rocket science at all. You know, you want to prove that something exists and it's gone from one place to another. Yeah, not rocket science. But the modernization of it is, in my opinion, a bit of a marketing problem than actually a technological problem. But equally, it has its place. But yeah, I completely agree with you. AI is achievable. It has tangible benefit, added value to everybody in the, you know, a lender, benefit there, for a customer, benefit there, for consumers, you know, day-to-day life. I could imagine having an AI, you know, organize, you know, like basically like a PA organizing my diary. That'd be nice. You know, rather than me doing it, that would be great.
But I think there's a really practical issue, even when you've got over the technology and the computing power and all that, and it's one of trust. Because I'll give you an example. About 20 years ago, I was doing an assignment with a company, big chemical company, I'm not going to name them, where they had two plants literally physically next door to each other. And the output of plant A was the input of plant B, largely, apart from a few byproducts. So these guys were having all sorts of problems with their supply forecasts, So they each did a supply forecast going out and coming in. So one of the suggestions was, well, why don't you just sit down and do it together and just do one, Which is exactly the same idea as blockchain, really, isn't it? Why don't we just have one flow of information which we all share? The logic of it is just, outstanding. I mean, it's smacking you in the head. It's so obvious to do. Why didn't they do it? Because they didn't trust each other, and these were guys who worked for the same company. So what happens when we work for different companies and we're in different countries and different cultures and, et cetera, et cetera? We have so many things in our head why we don't quite trust, even some of our friends, we don't quite trust them 100% on that subject.
I think you're right about the trust idea, and also it links into it is about actually I think popular awareness and understanding. I mean, conceptually, the idea of a blockchain is a lot easier to communicate and be understood and accepted, even if the technology might have its own complexities. The actual concept of it is this node talking to this node and it being individually visible externally to be verified, is something that people can communicate and understand, and that gives it an acceptability which is still remote from artificial intelligence. And people, I think, really struggle with what artificial intelligence actually is, what it does, and how it works. And sometimes I go back to using even using the precursors of intelligence, or doing simple regression analysis within a business, and people think, what on earth is that? How on earth does that work? How are you making these correlations? When it's something as simple and straightforward as that, it's difficult to communicate. Something artificial intelligence, it's just at another level. And I think that's possibly one of the issues, is the conceptualization of it makes it very hard for people to trust it and accept it.
Well, I think that Daniel made a good point, though, is if you can reverse engineer it. So, just imagine you have a web page or an interface where an AI, or to be honest with you, I actually really hate the word AI, but they talk about advanced machine learning. But if you can show the journey that it took, because that's all it's doing, is really it's getting data, it's learning from what it did previously, and it's now applying a similar rule. And then it's applying, it's doing it very, very, very fast. But if you can see the workflow that the AI took, and see it to its conclusion, and you can understand that, then the mystery's gone. I mean, because frankly, most of the people that are, talking about AI are people in IBM, or they're in sort of universities. They're the ones who are creating it. And like most things, the car was created by the same people, but then it's, worked on now by, can do it on your weekends. But as soon as you can reverse engineer it, or create a manual, or see something that anyone can understand, then it will be trusted. And I think that is really then people like myself, it's my job. So if we're going to do something smart, is to then, to kind of be a little bit transparent about the workings.
But I think one of the problems, Elliot, is that the vast majority of people who are talking about AI are marketeers, who know nothing about AI, and they're just attaching this to their various products to make them sound different from the opposition. There's no substance behind it at all. And unfortunately, one of the side effects of that is that these guys' customers over the next 2, 3, 4 years will have bought into, my God, isn't this AI thing fantastic, and let's do it, and it's all going to be amazing, only to find out that it was all a pack of lies. When actually, I mean, I'd agree with you. I mean, and with Daniel, the potential for this is just, we'll all be completely dumbstruck when we see some of the things that can be done. It's going to generate a level of skepticism around this subject, because people said, oh yeah, I tried that and it turned out to be a false dawn, when actually they never really tried it, because they've never really seen it.
Well, and the key is, right now, people should not be referring to data analytics or machine learning as AI, because it's misrepresenting what it will actually eventually be. No one has an AI right now. Even that Go technically is not an AI. It's a machine learning. It's a pattern analysis. It's doing a little bit of guesswork as well. But the end result, the kind of the thing that Hollywood has painted in our minds is a long way off, isn't it? But really, really intelligent systems that have a really clear goal, in a financial system, if it can actually get good risk analytics, or it can get people funded quicker, or it can, whatever it's designed to do, as long as it can demonstrate that it's reliable, consistent, and trustworthy. And that's a really good outcome. But people saying that they've got an AI, it grates on me, but then I'll stay quiet on that.
To me, it reminds me, I remember when ERPs came along. ERPs are everywhere now. Even small companies have really sophisticated ERPs these days. But it's not that long ago. It's only 10 years ago. I remember going to one client, and you said, okay, what's your system landscape was? And this guy, it wasn't a page. He had a huge poster, which we put out on the floor, and there was 300 boxes on it of all these faces and everything that we're all talking. And it was just like, I mean, you went away with a headache. It was just horrible. So that part, it hasn't entirely gone away, but largely has gone away. But one of the results of that is we're now sitting on massive banks of data, and that's just within one company. Yeah. And then when we talk about, all this stuff like, open accounting and all that kind of stuff, it could be blockchain, it could be different technologies, where basically one system is going to start talking more directly to another system, like EDI, been around for years, but kind of at an enhanced level. We're going to be drowned in data, utterly drowned in it, because even at the level of data that exists now for big companies, with a few exceptions like Google, most companies do absolutely nothing with it. They don't know what to do with it. They haven't even thought of what to do with it. And that's going to take time before the amazing mathematicians that work for people like Google. There's enough of those kinds of people that they can work for lots of other companies as well. That could take decades. So again, it's the technology versus the application all the time. And even with what we have today, the technology is minimum 20 years old, most of it, some older, but we haven't learned fully how to use these things yet. So my skepticism would be, why will it be any different in 10 years time and 20 years time? I mean, the technologies are definitely advancing and will continue to advance, but it's the use we make of those technologies. So it could be like giving the caveman the cigarette lighter. He's still going to light the fire. Yeah. So so we get into that kind of scenario. I mean, for me personally, if I look professionally at what I do and how I do it, it's not actually that dissimilar from 20 years ago. And it's what I do. It's not about just there's a piece of data and let's kind of add this formula to it and so on. It's the interpretation of that data is actually the real golden stuff. Not the crunching of it. The crunching of it is only really stage one. And I think we're still trying to achieve that.
But it takes two. It needs one side who are the consumers to adopt and actually be more gung ho to adopting new technology. There is technology there. I mean, I know for with very day to day experiences is that you can provide this great technology, but then the actual practical application is sometimes seen as there's a lot of cynicism about whether or not it's going to work for business, and so people do need to open up to new and change. Especially like go back to a very early part of this conversation about when shock happens, people need to embrace change and be willing to change. But then obviously the technology companies need to be less buzzwords, about things, because actually it puts people off. And I'm guilty of it. I am guilty of it, but at the same time,
one very interesting thing I think is that when put it like this, when I was at school, we had one Apple II computer in the entire school, and we all thought it was amazing. And we went to a computer club where there was 27 of us looking at one screen. Now that seems utterly ridiculous now, doesn't it? But that's the way things were. But one of the things that has not changed, and hasn't changed at all, is the specialism of data analytics. Lots of people these days, particularly older folks, have the impression that just because we see young'uns going around with their mobile phones and iPads, pardon me, and all this kind of stuff, that somehow they must be so used to computers and they know everything about technology and all that. But actually, you put a good old spreadsheet in front of them and say, work out an algorithm for me which would do this, and the same 95% of people haven't got a clue, the same as the 95% of people wouldn't have had a clue 30 years ago. Same.
This is the perfect point, for one of the last topics that I had. But John, do we have enough time?
Yes, carry on, please.
Okay, because this is a great discussion, guys. And these are great points because one of the topics that we discussed was accessibility. And if you compare, I mean, like even the Apple II was super accessible for the time, right? Because before that, basically, or long before that, you would have to assemble your own computer. It didn't come in like a prepackaged form. I mean, I'm doing this from my iPad, so this is as packaged as it gets for a computing device that's a bit bigger than a mobile phone. And Brian is exactly right that I would say that the accessibility is getting higher and higher because user experience design, so which really means the interfaces that we are connecting ourselves with the digital world, be it the internet or some kind of software. The design has never been better or never had to be better because we have such small screens, right? And it has to be really simple. So I would even argue that now people know much less about computers than I don't know, like 20 years ago. I used to be able to build my own computer, right? I in the 90s. No, I'm not so sure anymore. I mean, the pieces are the same. There's a bit more processor cores and stuff like this. But I could. It looks completely different. There are a lot less cables and some more stuff. You know, it's not like this. And so there are two things at play here. It is much easier to use and much harder to understand. And this can get kind of dangerous. And this is what we were talking about, these meme stocks, right? Like these stock trading. I'm just going there. I mean, we also have these kind of apps in our space where we need easy access for customers, like these portals, you know, supply chain finance portals or factoring for uploading invoices. But there you can, and just to paint a picture of this landscape, what it means, UX accessibility is people can trade stocks on their phone for thousands of dollars with one touch of their finger. It's really, if you sneeze on your iPad, you could lose 30K. I mean, you know, I'm a bit, you know, exaggerating, but this is happening. And this will, and this is now one of the more cutting edge things, that this started all with crypto trading 7-8 years back, when it became more mainstream. And I was a part of that, actually, because I was fascinated by this technology, that these platforms got more and more user friendly, so you could use them from mobile devices. And now we have a situation where things like Reddit, which is a huge online forum for all kinds of topics, has one board, let's say, where you can connect with other people, has millions of members, 10 million plus, I'm not sure. And they give each other stock recommendations, right? And they're buying them with their mobile phones and like this. And there are stocks now that are getting pushed by lots of small investors, like GameStop, a video game reseller, physical stores, which was deemed to be, you know, this is basically a dead company, because who buys games in a physical store anymore, where you can just buy them? And in the pandemic, to boot, right? And in the pandemic, people played a lot of video games. I mean, what else can you do? But not through GameStop. It's not a platform. It's not the place. It's not like a console with a PlayStation or Steam, which is like a platform to buy games online. And what happens is, through the easy access landscape in Reddit, people are recommending each other these stocks, and they can just easily, like a gamification kind of purpose, you know, it's not rocket science anymore. You just push a button, $500. That's one GameStop stock.
But Daniel, you know, I mean, the thing about all this is that, and this has happened numerous times and just in the last century, that we introduce technology to something and then we have an unexpected outcome like this. That, you know, an example would be the invention of the ticker tape machine in the 1920s. In America, exploded, you know, retail share ownership in the United States. Absolutely exploded it, because we could have real-time information from the New York Stock Exchange, even when I was in the back end of Iowa somewhere in the middle of the snow. So the internet, and all its infrastructure is out there now. So you see, for instance, we can now do cryptocurrency and trading, all this, you know, anywhere in the world. I could be the top of the Himalayas and do it, you know. And what that then does is it introduces a level of irrationality to all these models, and this becomes the unexpected outcome, like GameStop. You know, GameStop should be a pretty ordinary, boring share by all accounts, but clearly it isn't. Because of all this interaction, this social interaction, which is going on. Unfortunately, I think it's still going to end in tears at some point. But
it has to be.
But I mean, somebody's going to be writing sociology manuals on exactly, what happened and why and what was the mentality behind it and so on, because it is a little bit crazy. But this is what happens with the unintended consequences of a technology.
Yeah.
I think oh, sorry, Daniel.
So sorry, let me just a small point. I would argue for the other side now, just out of principle, that I would say this irrationality is actually a new rationality, because they play with narratives there. They say this stock, I invest in this stock also because GameStop is, I don't know, is cool, whatever, and I like it, but because the stock was heavily shorted by some hedge funds, and there's some evidence for that, some evidence on the contrary, and they say, and a short is, so basically they have to cover the short at some time, and if everybody holds, and this is the narrative really, if everybody holds, even if the stock goes down, eventually they have to cover their short, and everybody will get rich. Can you believe that? And this is kind of this is a new rationale, but coming up with that, if that makes sense or not, but this is the narrative.
Yes, it was absolutely an anti-capitalist activity, wasn't it? That
yes.
was what it became, an anti-capitalist movement. Let's get the hedge funds.
Absolutely.
But always remember that just because you come up with a counterintuitive logic, which might be quite, you say, my God, intelligent, it doesn't make it right.
Yes, of course not. But
This wouldn't have also happened though without the apps on the other side. People coming off Reddit, jumping onto a mobile phone app, and then suddenly being experts. Well, they became expert enough to be able to revive that company from the brink of being shorted. So people jumped onto a mobile phone app from the internet, put money in. A lot of them made quite a lot of money in 24 hours, and some lost their entire life savings, and that's a real shame. But that is testament to an amazing customer, or what they call UX, or customer experience, where you can jump in, immediately know what you need to do, and and kind of achieve your outcome. But yeah, I mean, I think this is, in my opinion, the most important thing, more than AI, more than blockchain, is actually that the industry does adopt really good quality customer experience or user experience design, because in the end of the day, it's great having an AI, but if the information it skirts out is completely unreadable, unusable, and no one knows how to actually do something with it, then what's the point? But also, this is something that almost anybody can contribute to. If you're the user of a thing, you can say, scissors, for example, are very, very usable, aren't they? You pick up scissors, you know how to use it. Why can't technology be like that? Yes, it helps with apps, and that's a whole world. In a software development firm nowadays, if you're building mobile phone apps, you have 50% of the office be designers and 50% be developers. Well, that wasn't always the case. It used to be just mostly developers.
Yeah.
And I think that that's going to be really useful for financial services. Yeah, you can see that in all walks at the moment. I think the unfortunate consequence of technology, or the boffins getting a little bit ahead of the practical usefulness of applications, and so it's going to have we're going to go kind of back that way. Then the technologists will get ahead, and then perhaps we'll have another design renaissance, and then we'll go back the other way, and so the dance will continue. But it's an interesting thing.
I think, Elliot, you've just described, that's really the way of the world, isn't it? New technology comes along, and we all figure out how we're going to use this, and eventually we get the hang of it. But by that time, we've done something new again, and we go through the cycle again and again and again.
Yeah, it's a very good point about the design phase and technology. We always think, also, is this innovation or not? And maybe the question that we should ask ourselves is, what paradigm are we in? With for example, we have floppy disks. If we remember those, like really small space, and it had to be so efficient, right? A bit like today, the design has to be efficient, at least, because if we move one button 1 millimeter, maybe our user is going to hate our app and never open it again because the screen is so small, right? Then we have CD-ROM, lots of space. It doesn't matter. We put videos on there and music and games. Then we have modem speed, internet speed, small space again, websites have to be small, right? Then we have DSL speeds, space doesn't matter anymore again. And now we have the YouTubes and TikToks of this world. We can even use them on mobile. So it's maybe one thing that we can kind of extrapolate from that is that design is really important. It's just more important than ever. Windows used to look so horrible, you know, and we didn't even see it. We thought it was the best thing, like Windows 95. It was amazing, you know, for me to see that as a kid. But now we really have the good and efficient design. And if we don't have that, and Elliot made an interesting point, I think, in one of the sessions or mails that we wrote each other, actually that what was it again? It was a really good point.
I'll make a few interesting points so I can.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, no, just take over. Just take over.
Yeah.
I'll think of what
Which
you
one?
I'm not sure.
But whilst we're just thinking of that final point, I think we do need to start bringing the session to a conclusion, because we have got to our hours now. Whilst you're thinking of that, you started talking about floppy disks. Well, I can do better than that. My first experience of this was a disk that was the size of a dustbin lid that I think stored all of 7.5 kilobyte.
Oh my God.
Yes. And that was the state of the art when I was a research student in those days. So yeah, clearly the technology has moved just a little bit in the last few years. So there we are. Anyway, gentlemen, a quick last thought from each of you before we come to a conclusion, I think. So Daniel, your floor.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for this discussion, guys. It has been amazing. That was what I hoped for. That we and hopefully that the audience sees it the same way, that we kind of see the let's say the landscape and see what trends could emerge from that. Because as everyone, we cannot make these accurate predictions, but I think it makes sense that for example, our hopes in AI are not unfunded, and it definitely makes sense from my standpoint that design, hire the best designer you can for your software, for your front ends. Otherwise, your customer is going to hate you. So that would be my closing statement. And then yeah, I want to thank you all. Great.
Okay.
Great experience.
Elliot, last word from you.
Yeah, no, again, thank you very much for inviting me. No, I think in summary, technology is fantastic, but it has to have a purpose. It has to add value and have a benefit. You know, I think we need to let technology do what it does best and let humans do what they do best. And I think a marriage between the two in the future is the way forward. And I think it's really incumbent on the software providers or people who create these things to be thinking about what's it for. And you know, I'm making that my mission. And yeah, sounds like, you know, I'm a bit cynical as well, but you know, in the end of the day, I think the outcome, you know, as long as you're thinking positively, should be positive.
Excellent, thank you. And Brian?
Well, you know, when I started my first job in London, the computers were using punch cards, yeah, which I'm sure none of us have seen for a few years. And now we see, you know, we have 5G coming along, and we were talking about AI, and you know, there's no doubt that you know, the race of technology just keeps going on and on and on. And what I would caution to people as they go through their careers is you have to keep up with it. Because that's one thing I've always tried to do, and you can see just in the kind of things we're talking about right now, this is not going to be the same in 10 years' time. It's going to be totally different and radical, and 10 years after that, different again. And that's going to be the challenge for most of us, however smart we think we are.
It's true.
Okay.
We have to listen to those VOA webinars. That's one thing to keep up with the technology.
Listen to the WOA webinars, and yes, I invite anybody who's been listening and watching and will watch our recording of this session to think about joining us. So with that thought of I don't know, what do you call it, stochastic randomness of the future, then we'll leave you. And gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for your time, and thank you everybody in the audience. Goodbye now.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.